The community hall was buzzing with energy. People had gathered for the charity event, and the atmosphere was full of chatter and laughter. Guests in sparkling dresses and crisp suits moved through the room, holding glasses of juice, tea, or sparkling water. They talked about business deals, recent travels, and the performers they were excited to see. In the corner, servers quietly moved among the tables, carrying trays of snacks and small desserts, trying not to disturb the conversations. The air smelled faintly of flowers, mixed with the scent of coffee and fresh pastries. In the midst of all this excitement, an elderly nun quietly entered the hall. Her habit was simple and plain, a light gray that did not stand out at all among the colorful clothing of the guests. She walked slowly, leaning slightly on a small wooden cane. Her movements were calm and careful, as if each step was measured and thoughtful. She didn't have jewelry, flashy shoes, or any makeup. There was nothing about her that would draw attention except, perhaps, her gentle, warm smile. As she moved to a quiet corner. Several people glanced at her briefly and then returned to their conversations. Some whispered to each other, shaking their heads with a small, amused smile. Who invited her? One young woman whispered, she looks like she doesn't belong here, said a man standing near the refreshment table. These comments were quiet enough to be almost polite, but they carried a tone of judgment. No one noticed, or perhaps no one cared to notice, the calm dignity the nun carried. She found a small seat near the back of the hall, away from the center of attention. She sat down slowly, placing her cane beside her, and folded her hands in her lap. From this distance, she observed everything. She watched the way the wealthy guests laughed loudly, almost like they were performing for each other. She noticed the performers on stage practicing their warm-ups, some striking, confident poses and nodding to each other with exaggerated smiles. She saw people checking their watches and phones, some already thinking about leaving early or taking selfies to post on social media, yet she did not frown. She did not scowl or roll her eyes. She simply watched. There was a quiet patience about her, a sense that she belonged to a different world, one where rushing, boasting, or showing off had little value. She seemed to be completely at ease in the background, like a calm river flowing under the noisy bridge above. As she sat there, a few children playing near the refreshments glanced at her. They were curious because she looked different from everyone else. She gave them a gentle smile, and the children giggled and ran away, thinking she was friendly. Some of the adults, however, were not so friendly in their judgment. They whispered about her age, her appearance, and the fact that she had no flashy accessories, no social status, nothing to make her seem important. The nun noticed the whispers but said nothing. She remained still, a quiet presence in the midst of noise and energy. The event had been planned for months, and the organizers were very proud of the program. On stage, the grand piano was already set, gleaming under the lights. Several performers had been practicing their pieces, some tapping impatiently on the keys, others humming loudly to themselves. The audience was eager to see who would play first, who would impress the crowd, who would be applauded. There was an unspoken expectation that the young, talented, and well-known performers would dominate the evening. From her seat, the nun quietly observed the piano. It was a magnificent instrument, polished and ready to produce music that could fill the hall and touch the hearts of anyone listening. She did not move toward it. She did not make a show of her attention. She simply looked at it with gentle curiosity, as if remembering something long ago but not yet ready to speak or act on it. Time passed slowly, and the audience remained largely focused on themselves and the people around them. They clapped politely after small announcements, laughed at jokes they thought were clever, and occasionally glanced at the performers warming up on stage. No one thought to pay attention to the small, quiet figure at the back, the elderly nun with her gentle hands folded in her lap, but she did not mind. She knew she had a purpose, even if no one else could see it yet. There was a quiet confidence in her presence, the kind that comes from years of discipline, study, and a deep understanding of one's own abilities. She had learned long ago that being noticed was not the same as being valuable. Some of the most beautiful things in the world could go unnoticed for years, yet they would remain beautiful all the same. As she sat watching, she thought of the music she had played so many years ago. Her fingers, though now frail and slightly stiff, still remembered the piano keys. Her mind replayed melodies she had performed countless times in her youth. There was a memory in her hands, a muscle memory that connected her deeply to the piano. She did not plan to show it yet. She simply remembered at one point, a group of young performers walked past her, laughing and chatting about who would impress the audience most. One of them paused briefly, looked at the nun, and said with a smirk, "I wonder if she even knows how to play." The others laughed softly and moved on. The nun did not respond. She remained seated, calm and composed. As if their words could not touch her, the event continued, and the audience's attention stayed on the loud, flashy, and confident performers. The room was full of energy, yet there was an emptiness to it. People were applauding for appearances, enjoying the idea of a lively evening more than the music itself. But the nun was different. She was not there for applause, for attention, or for recognition. She was there for the music itself, for the joy of sound, for the silent connection it could create. As the first performer prepared to take the stage, the nun quietly shifted in her seat. She adjusted her habit, making sure it lay neatly across her shoulders. She placed her hands on her lap and closed her eyes briefly, as if centering herself. In that moment she was completely still, almost blending into the background, but there was an energy about her that no one could yet see. It was calm but powerful, gentle but certain. Several minutes later, she opened her eyes and looked toward the piano again. Her gaze lingered on the smooth black and white keys, and a small knowing smile appeared on her face. She remembered the sound of the piano, the vibrations that filled the room, the way music could reach hearts without a single word. She did not yet move toward it, but the memory of her connection to the instrument seemed to make her taller, more confident in her quiet way. Meanwhile, the audience continued to ignore her. Some glanced briefly, some whispered judgments, and some didn't notice her at all. But she did not let it disturb her. There was no frustration, no resentment. She simply waited, patient and calm, as if she knew that the moment to act would come naturally. Her presence alone, though unnoticed, seemed to carry a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the loud energy of the room. In the back of her mind, she thought about the lessons she had learned over the years: humility, patience, and the importance of inner strength. She had lived a life dedicated to helping others, teaching and sharing her skills quietly without seeking recognition. And now, in this hall full of excitement and chatter, she felt a familiar stir in her heart. She felt that the music she carried within her could speak louder than any applause or laughter. She only needed the right moment. As the first performer stepped onto the stage, the nun remained seated, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She watched the performance politely. Yet her mind wandered to the melodies she could play, the music that had lived inside her for decades. She thought about the sound of each note, the rhythm, the emotion that flowed from her fingers. She did not need anyone's approval or attention. The music itself was reward enough. The crowd was completely absorbed in what they thought was the main event. They had no idea that a quiet, elderly nun sat in the corner, her mind and heart full of skill and experience that could leave them breathless. She did not move, did not try to impress, and did not speak. She simply waited, quietly and patiently, like a river flowing slowly beneath a noisy bridge, knowing that her time to touch the hearts of others would come. And in that simple, unnoticed way, the nun set the stage for what would become the most unforgettable part of the evening. Though no one realized it yet, the energy in the room was about to change, and the quiet observer in the corner would soon become the reason everyone remembered the night. The hall was still buzzing when a small commotion erupted near the stage. One of the young performers, who had been preparing for the next piano piece, whispered urgently to the event organizer. It seemed there had been a problem, a last-minute issue that would prevent them from performing. The organizer's calm face tightened for a moment, and then he quickly tried to find a solution. He stepped to the microphone, clearing his throat as he addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen circumstances, our next performer won't be able to take the stage. We apologize for this change and hope you enjoy the rest of the evening." A few people muttered, disappointed. They had been looking forward to a particular performer, someone famous in their circles, and now that expectation had been broken. Some guests sighed, shifted in their seats, or whispered complaints to their neighbors. The atmosphere became a bit restless. People glanced at the stage, wondering who might fill the sudden gap. Meanwhile, the elderly nun in the corner remained seated, her hands folded in her lap. She had been quietly observing everything, as always. Nothing about the commotion surprised her. She had long ago learned that life often brought unexpected changes, and the right response was always calm patience. The event organizer glanced nervously around the hall, trying to find someone to step forward. He looked at the performers, but each one seemed either too busy with their preparations or too hesitant to volunteer. Time was passing quickly, and the audience's attention was slowly starting to wander. He needed anyone who could take the stage and keep the evening flowing. That's when the nun slowly stood up. She moved with her cane, carefully but steadily, toward the stage. At first, no one noticed. Some people were still talking, and a few were checking their phones. But gradually, heads began to turn. Whispers spread quietly through the crowd. "Who is that?" Someone asked, their voice tinged with curiosity and confusion. "I think—" "That's a nun," another replied. "She's so old. I didn't know nuns came to these events." A small group near the stage exchanged doubtful glances. "Do you think she can even play?" One of them asked, clearly skeptical. "I mean, she looks frail." Even the event organizer hesitated for a moment. He had not expected this. He opened his mouth to say something, probably to ask her to wait, but she simply smiled at him politely and gestured that she would be happy to help. Her eyes were calm, gentle, yet there was a quiet confidence in them that he could not quite explain. With a small nod, the organizer stepped aside. The nun made her way carefully to the grand piano, each step measured and deliberate. The audience watched, their curiosity mixed with amusement. Some thought it would be funny if the elderly nun tried to perform. Others were just intrigued, wondering if she might surprise them. When she reached the piano, she paused for a moment, placing her hands on the keys lightly, almost as if testing the surface. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but simply from age. A few guests in the front row whispered among themselves. "She probably can't even play a simple tune," one said. Shaking their head, "She's too old for this," another whispered. The nun did not react. She did not frown, she did not try to defend herself. She simply took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and placed her fingers on the keys. The room grew quiet, as if sensing that something unusual was about to happen. The chatter faded, and even the youngest guests stopped fidgeting, turning their attention toward the small, quiet figure sitting at the piano. Her hands rested lightly on the keys. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, centering herself. The audience held their breath. There was a strange feeling in the room, a sense of anticipation that no one could explain. People had underestimated her, and now they were waiting without knowing what to expect. Then she played the first note. It was soft, almost tentative, but perfectly clear. The note resonated through the hall, a gentle, warm sound that seemed to touch something deep inside every listener. The audience shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, realizing this was no ordinary performance. The nun's fingers began to move across the keys, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. The music was not loud or showy. It was simple at first, a melody that flowed like a calm stream. But as she continued, it became clear that the nun's skill was extraordinary. Every note was precise. Every movement was deliberate. She played with a kind of mastery that only comes from decades of practice and experience. The melody seemed to fill the room, reaching every corner, capturing the attention of everyone present. Some people gasped quietly. Others exchanged looks of disbelief. "Is she a trained pianist?" One whispered. "I never would have guessed," said another. The young performers who had been preparing to play were frozen, staring at her with wide eyes. Their confidence, which had been so obvious just minutes before, was replaced by awe and a little shame. They had thought talent always looked flashy and young. They were learning, right then, that true skill does not depend on age, appearance, or showiness. The nun's fingers moved more freely now. The melody grew more complex, intertwining with harmonies that created an emotional depth no one expected. Some audience members closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others sat rigid, unable to move, afraid that even a small sound from them would break the moment. The music was gentle, but it was powerful. It spoke of patience, experience, and quiet strength. Even the event organizer, who had been nervous just moments ago, found himself captivated. He could not believe what he was hearing. His mind, filled with doubts about how the evening would continue, was completely absorbed by the sound of her playing. The nun had transformed the room. What had been restless and distracted was now still, unified by the music. Some guests felt tears prickling their eyes. The melody seemed to awaken memories, emotions they had not realized they carried. It was the kind of music that didn't just fill a hall, it filled hearts. The elderly nun, so quietly judged just minutes before, now held the entire audience in a spell. For a moment, it was as if the world outside the hall did not exist. The chatter, the judgments, and the distractions vanished. All that mattered was the sound of the piano and the skilled hands guiding it. The nun did not play for applause or recognition. She played because the music itself deserved to be heard, because she had spent her life learning how to share it, and because she knew the right moment had finally come. The audience, completely captivated, began to whisper among themselves, not with judgment this time, but with awe. "I didn't expect that," one person said. "She's incredible," another murmured. People leaned closer to hear every note, afraid to miss a single sound. Even those who had mocked her earlier now felt a mix of admiration and humility. Minutes passed, but it felt longer as the music continued to flow effortlessly. The nun played not just with skill, but with emotion, filling each note with meaning. She did not rush, and she did not exaggerate. The melody grew naturally, building in strength without losing its grace. Every hand movement, every subtle change in tempo, showed her mastery. By now, the room was silent in a way it had never been before. Guests who had been chatting, laughing, or checking their phones were now fully present. They were witnessing something rare, a true moment of art, performed by someone who no one had expected to amaze them. When she finally finished the first piece, the hall stayed quiet for a moment. No one moved. No one clapped. The silence itself was full of respect, full of awe, full of realization that they had underestimated her. Then, slowly, a soft murmur of applause began, spreading through the room. People stood, one by one, until the entire hall was clapping. The sound was loud and sincere, not polite or rehearsed. The nun simply smiled, a small, gentle smile. She did not bow dramatically or seek further attention. She had done what she had come to do. She had shared her music and reminded everyone that true talent cannot be judged by age, appearance, or first impressions. The audience had learned a lesson that evening, one that would stay with them long after the event was over. And the elderly nun, quiet and humble as ever, returned to her seat with the same calm dignity she had shown when she first arrived. The energy in the room had changed, and everyone knew it. The room remained quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that feels heavy with expectation. The elderly nun's small smile lingered as she positioned herself back at the piano, her hands hovering lightly over the keys. The first piece had been soft and gentle, enough to capture attention and surprise the audience, but she knew there was more to share. Her fingers, though slightly aged and frail, remembered every note, every rhythm, and every subtle nuance that made the music come alive. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, centering herself. Her mind reached back to memories of concert halls, lessons, and countless hours of practice in her youth. The piano had been her companion long before she had dedicated herself to a life of service. Music had been her secret friend, a language that spoke without words. Now, standing, or rather sitting before an audience that had underestimated her, she felt a quiet determination to let her gift speak for itself. Her fingers touched the keys, beginning with a soft, deliberate chord. The note lingered in the air, resonating through the hall. Slowly the melody grew, weaving through gentle arpeggios and flowing harmonies. It was not a flashy display, not a performance meant to impress superficially, but it had an undeniable elegance. Every sound seemed to float, filling every corner of the room with a warmth that caught the audience by surprise. Some guests leaned forward, eyes wide, unable to look away. The young performers who had arrived with confidence now sat frozen, their previous bravado replaced by awe. Each note that the nun played seemed to carry a story, a depth of experience that spoke louder than words ever could. It was music that felt lived in, a reflection of decades of practice, discipline, and a profound understanding of emotion. As she continued, the piece grew more complex. The soft, gentle chords transformed into flowing sequences that demanded precise timing and control. Her hands moved with unexpected agility, fingers dancing over the keys with ease. There was an effortless grace in the way she played, as though her fingers were extensions of her thoughts and feelings. The audience, many of whom had doubted her mere moments ago, now watched in stunned silence. The room seemed to shift with each measure. The previous chatter, the laughter, the whispers all had vanished. Guests were no longer focused on socializing, comparing outfits, or checking their phones. Every ear was tuned to the piano, every heart sensitive to the music's emotional current. Some people closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, feeling it reach places deep inside that words could never touch. Others sat rigid, afraid to break the moment with even the smallest sound, realizing that something extraordinary was unfolding before them. A few audience members felt tears prickling at the corners of their eyes. The melody spoke of patience, of quiet determination, of a lifetime spent learning and refining a craft in silence. It spoke of humility, yet radiated strength. The elderly nun, small and unassuming, was now commanding the entire room with her music. There was no need for dramatic gestures, no need for applause or showiness. The power of her skill was enough to captivate everyone completely, even the organizer, who had been worried moments ago about how to fill the gap in the schedule, now found himself standing near the side of the stage, utterly absorbed. His nervous energy melted away, replaced by admiration and amazement. He realized that the nun had transformed the event in a way no one could have predicted. What had seemed like a minor problem, a performer canceling at the last minute, had become a moment of profound beauty, all because someone who had been overlooked had stepped forward. The melody evolved, moving through changes in tempo and dynamics that demanded precision and emotional depth. The nun's hands flew across the keys, each note deliberate and perfectly executed. She shifted seamlessly between soft, tender passages and powerful, expressive sections, creating a musical story that held the audience spellbound. The sound was full, rich, and deeply moving. Some guests who had initially dismissed her were now whispering to each other, their voices low with awe. "I can't believe she's playing like that," one said. "She's incredible." Another nodded, unable to speak, simply letting the music speak for itself. Even the most skeptical were captivated. There was a universal realization settling over the room. Talent and mastery cannot be judged by appearance, age, or social status. The young performers who had been so confident now looked on with a mixture of humility and inspiration. They realized that the performance was not just about technical skill, though the nun's technical mastery was undeniable. It was about expression, feeling, and the ability to connect with others through sound. Their earlier assumptions about what makes someone a great musician were quietly challenged, and a lesson in respect was unfolding before their eyes. The nun's eyes remained focused, yet serene. She was not performing for recognition or praise. She was playing because the music itself demanded it, because she had spent her life cultivating the ability to bring it to life, and because she knew the audience needed to hear it even if they didn't know it yet. Her connection to the piano was complete, a conversation between her heart and the instrument, each note carrying meaning beyond the mere sound. As the piece progressed, the audience felt a subtle shift in energy. The room, once filled with distractions, was now unified in attention. Each listener experienced the music in their own way. Some felt joy, some nostalgia, some a quiet sadness, yet all felt the depth of what the nun was sharing. The melody reached inside them, touching memories, dreams, and emotions that had been dormant. awakening them in a way that only truly skilled music can. The complexity of the music increased further, weaving together multiple themes and harmonies in a way that seemed effortless. Her hands moved with precision and elegance, never rushing, never faltering. Each chord resonated with clarity, each passage flowed naturally into the next. The hall was filled with a richness that seemed almost tangible, as if the sound itself could be felt in the chest and heart of every listener. Some audience members found themselves holding their breath, captivated by the skill and emotion of the performance. Others unconsciously leaned forward, their eyes wide with admiration. There was a feeling of shared experience, a silent connection between everyone present, united by the beauty of the music. The nun, though small in stature and quiet in demeanor, had created a moment that transcended age, status, and expectation. As the piece neared its climax, the music swelled in both volume and intensity, yet it remained controlled, never overwhelming the listener. Every note was deliberate, every pause purposeful. The nun's fingers moved with incredible speed and accuracy, yet the performance felt natural, flowing, and deeply expressive. It was clear that every movement had been honed over decades of practice, each one contributing to the emotional impact of the piece. The audience, fully immersed now, felt a mix of emotions, surprise, admiration, and a profound sense of respect. They realized that the elderly nun, whom they had overlooked and underestimated, was capable of creating an experience that would stay with them long after the evening ended. Her performance was more than music. It was a statement about skill, patience, and the quiet power of those who have devoted themselves to mastery over time. When the final notes played, the room held its breath for a moment. Silence followed, filled with the weight of what had just been experienced. No one moved, no one spoke. The hall was still, the air charged with reverence. The elderly nun's small, gentle smile remained, as she slowly lifted her hands from the keys, the memory of each note lingering in the hearts of those who had listened. Then, as if awakening from a shared dream, the audience erupted in applause. It began softly, then grew louder and louder, spreading through the hall until it became a wave of appreciation and admiration. People stood, some clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes, all filled with a newfound respect for the performer they had dismissed only minutes before. The young performers, once confident and self-assured, now looked on with humility and inspiration. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a lesson in both skill and character. Talent, they realized, was not always obvious. It could reside in the quietest, most unassuming person, waiting for the right moment to shine. The elderly nun did not seek further attention. She acknowledged the applause with a small nod, a gentle smile, and a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had shared her music, touched hearts, and reminded everyone present of a simple, powerful truth: greatness does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, patiently, and unexpectedly, revealing its beauty to those willing to listen. The applause slowly faded, but the energy in the room remained electric. The elderly nun's performance had captured everyone's attention, yet she did not rush to leave the stage or seek recognition. She remained seated at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, her posture calm and composed. The audience, still caught between awe and disbelief, watched as if waiting for her to begin again. And indeed, her next piece would take them even deeper into the world of her music. The hall had transformed completely. What had once been chatter, laughter, and distracted conversations was now replaced by stillness and focus. Every guest, regardless of age, social status, or expectation, was drawn into the performance. Some were sitting forward, eyes wide, taking in every movement of her hands. Others had closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling it reach parts of their hearts that words could never touch. The air was thick with emotion, a shared experience that bound everyone in the room together. She began the next piece with a delicate chord, almost like a whisper. It was soft, fragile, but perfectly intentional. Her fingers moved gracefully over the keys, each one pressing down with precision, each note resonating with clarity. The melody seemed to tell a story, one of patience, hope, and quiet strength. It was the kind of music that could make someone reflect on their life, their choices, and the moments they often overlooked. As she continued, the melody grew richer. Her hands moved faster now, yet every note remained perfectly controlled. The hall seemed to breathe with her music. Guests could feel it in their chests, in the subtle tension in their bodies, in the emotional waves that washed over them. Some had tears in their eyes, not out of sadness, but because they recognized the beauty, the purity, and the power of the music. The young performers who had been so confident earlier now looked on in astonishment. They had prepared to impress the audience themselves. Yet here was someone they had underestimated completely, demonstrating a level of skill, emotion, and mastery they had never imagined. Their expressions shifted from doubt to admiration, their previous self-assuredness replaced with humility. They were learning in real time that true talent cannot always be predicted or measured by appearance or age. The elderly nun's music flowed naturally, each phrase blending seamlessly into the next. There was no rush, no exaggeration, only the quiet confidence that comes from decades of practice. She played with a depth of feeling that could only come from experience, from a life spent devoted to her craft and to service. The melody told stories that words could not, stories of love, loss, hope, and perseverance. Every listener felt that story differently, yet everyone felt it. A few audience members found themselves leaning closer to hear more clearly, as if proximity could deepen their understanding. Some whispered to each other softly, not to disrupt the moment but to share their astonishment. "I've never heard anything like this," one said. "She's amazing." Another nodded, unable to find words. It was as if the music had created a new language, one that required no speech to communicate. The nun's hands continued to move with grace and precision. She transitioned effortlessly between soft, tender passages and more powerful, expressive sections. The music built gradually, swelling in emotion, yet never overwhelming. It demanded attention not through volume or spectacle, but through its depth, elegance, and sincerity. Each note seemed to reach directly into the hearts of the listeners, leaving an impression that would linger long after the final chord. Some people closed their eyes completely, letting the sound envelope them. Others watched her fingers in awe, marveling at the dexterity, control, and skill displayed by someone they had assumed was too old, too quiet, too humble to impress. The contrast between their expectations and the reality before them was striking. The audience realized that appearances could be deceiving, that quiet, unassuming individuals could hold extraordinary abilities. The melody shifted subtly, moving into a section that was both haunting and uplifting. It was a piece that demanded not only technical skill but emotional interpretation, and the nun delivered it with perfection. Her timing, her touch, and her control over dynamics created an emotional tension that held the audience spellbound. Some were on the edge of their seats, others had their hands clasped, all completely absorbed in the performance. Even the event organizer, who had been frazzled moments ago, felt a deep sense of awe. His earlier concerns, the worry about keeping the schedule, the fear of disappointing the guests, all seemed insignificant compared to the profound beauty unfolding before him. The nun had not only filled the gap left by the canceled performer, but had elevated the entire event into something unforgettable. The music reached its climax, a series of cascading chords that were both intricate and powerful. Her fingers flew over the keys with remarkable speed and precision, yet every note was perfectly controlled. The hall was filled with sound that seemed almost tangible, a wave of emotion that enveloped everyone present. People sat frozen, eyes wide, completely absorbed in the performance. Some felt chills run down their spines, others felt tears sliding silently down their cheeks. The young performers, who had been so confident at the start of the evening, now sat humbled. They exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the lesson they were learning. Talent, they realized, is not always obvious. It can reside quietly in the most unexpected places, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And when it does, it can captivate, inspire, and transform everyone who witnesses it. The elderly nun's expression remained serene. She was not playing for applause or recognition, although it was clear she had captured the audience's admiration. She played because the music demanded it, because she had spent her life perfecting it, and because she knew that this moment the connection between performer and listener was far more important than anything else. As the piece drew to a close, the room became completely silent. The final notes lingered in the air, resonating in every corner of the hall. It was a moment of stillness, of reflection, of awe. No one moved, no one spoke. The silence itself was a tribute to the power of the performance. It was a shared experience, a collective acknowledgement of something extraordinary that had unfolded before them. Then, slowly, the audience began to applaud. The sound started softly, almost tentatively, as if some were unsure if it was appropriate to break the spell. But soon, the applause grew, spreading through the room until it became a wave of appreciation, admiration, and respect. People stood, clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes, all filled with a newfound understanding of the power of talent. Humility and dedication. The young performers joined in, clapping for the nun who had humbled them and inspired them in ways they could not yet fully articulate. Their previous competitiveness seemed trivial now. They had witnessed something rare, a mastery of skill and emotion that transcended age, appearance, and expectation. They realized that humility, patience, and dedication could achieve greatness far beyond what they had imagined. The elderly nun acknowledged the applause with a gentle nod and a quiet smile. She did not make a show of herself, did not bow dramatically, and did not seek further attention. Her satisfaction came from knowing that the music had touched hearts, that it had reminded everyone present of a simple truth: true talent is not always visible, and greatness can come quietly, patiently, and unexpectedly. As the audience gradually settled, still murmuring in admiration and awe, the nun returned to her seat, placing her hands gently on her lap. She exuded calmness, a quiet dignity that contrasted with the emotional intensity of her performance. People continued to glance at her with newfound respect, realizing that they had misjudged her at the beginning of the evening. Their initial assumptions based on age, appearance, and demeanor were now replaced by admiration, humility, and inspiration. The performance had changed the energy in the room. Guests who had been distracted, impatient, or judgmental were now united in appreciation of the music and the musician. The young performers had learned a lesson in humility. The audience had experienced the beauty of true artistry. And the elderly nun had reminded everyone that the most powerful moments often come quietly. Without fanfare and without expectation, the hall was still alive with energy. But it was different now. It was quieter, deeper, more reflective. People spoke in hushed tones, sharing their astonishment and the feelings the music had stirred in them. Some were still wiping away tears, others were exchanging stories of their own experiences with music, inspired by what they had just witnessed. The nun, calm and serene, simply observed. She did not need to speak. She had given the audience a gift, one that transcended words, appearances, and social expectations. She had reminded everyone that skill, passion, and dedication have their own voice, one that can reach hearts in ways nothing else can. And in that moment, she knew that her purpose to share her music and touch others had been fulfilled completely. After the performance, the hall was still filled with a quiet energy. People remained seated, murmuring softly, their eyes lingering on the elderly nun. Some were still clapping, almost unable to stop, while others were trying to process what they had just witnessed. The energy in the room had shifted completely from casual chatter and judgment to admiration and respect. Every person felt the impact of her music in their own way. As if the notes had reached deep into their hearts, the nun returned to her seat, adjusting her habit with gentle movements, her hands resting lightly in her lap. She looked calm, serene, and unassuming, yet the room now seemed to orbit around her presence. People who had barely noticed her when she arrived were now captivated, drawn by the quiet dignity and talent they had underestimated. She had not sought attention, yet she had claimed it with her music in a way that demanded recognition. A young guest, moved by the performance, finally found the courage to approach her. "Excuse me, ma'am," they said softly, not wanting to disturb the moment. How did you learn to play like that? Your performance. It was incredible. The nun smiled gently, a small, warm expression that seemed to radiate humility and kindness. She leaned slightly forward and said softly, I learned when I was young. I studied for many years, long before I became a nun. Music has always been a part of my life, something I carried with me even while living a life of service. Some of the guests were listening closely, realizing that there was more to her story than they had imagined. They had judged her based on her appearance, her age, and her quiet demeanor, assuming she could not possess extraordinary skill. And now they understood they had been completely wrong. The talent they had witnessed was not a surprise. It was the result of decades of practice, dedication, and love for music. She continued, her voice soft yet clear. I performed in concert halls in my youth, traveled for competitions, and shared music with many people. But I chose a different path later in life, one of quiet service, teaching, and helping others. Music has always been my companion, and tonight I was happy to share it with you. The audience felt a collective sense of awe. Their admiration grew, but now it was tinged with understanding and respect for her life choices. They realized that true greatness did not always show itself in fame, appearance, or recognition. Sometimes it lived quietly, patiently, in someone who had dedicated their life to both skill and humility. The lessons they had learned in those few minutes of performance were worth far more than any applause or awards. Some guests whispered to each other, expressing their surprise. I can't believe she spent her life like that. And played like this after all these years, one said softly. It's incredible how much talent can be hidden behind simplicity. Another nodded, adding, it's a reminder not to judge anyone by how they look or seem. You never know the story someone carries inside them. The young performers, who had arrived confident and self-assured, approached her as well. Their expressions were a mix of humility and admiration. We were wrong to doubt you, one admitted quietly. You're playing... It's beyond anything we expected. How can someone be this skilled and still so humble? The nun smiled, her eyes twinkling slightly. Skill and humility can go together, she said softly. I've learned that life is not about showing off or seeking recognition. It is about doing what you love, sharing it when the time is right, and giving others the chance to feel its beauty. Her words, simple yet profound, seemed to resonate with everyone present. Guests who had come to the event thinking only of entertainment or socializing now found themselves reflecting deeply. They realized that true talent, like true kindness, does not need to announce itself. It can arrive quietly, gently, and unexpectedly, and when it does, it has the power to inspire, humble, and transform those who witness it. People continued to approach her, asking questions about her music, her life, and the path she had chosen. She answered each inquiry with patience and warmth, never boasting, never elevating herself. Every response carried the quiet wisdom of someone who had lived fully, experienced deeply, and understood the value of humility and dedication. Some of the audience members admitted, quietly to each other, that they had judged her harshly at first. I thought she was just, old and unremarkable, one whispered. I never imagined she could play like that. Another responded, it's a lesson, isn't it? Talent doesn't always look the way we expect, and neither does greatness. As the night continued, the event organizer took a moment to acknowledge her publicly. He approached the microphone, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we were fortunate tonight to witness something extraordinary. This evening reminded us that talent, skill, and heart are not always obvious at first glance. We thank our guest for sharing her gift and for showing us the true meaning of mastery and humility. The audience erupted into applause again, this time louder and more heartfelt than before. People stood to show their respect, some wiping away tears, others nodding in acknowledgement. The nun, seated quietly, acknowledged the applause with a small bow of her head, her smile gentle and serene. She had not sought recognition. Yet the room now overflowed with admiration and respect for her. After the event, many guests approached her to express their gratitude. Some shared personal stories of their own struggles, challenges, or missed opportunities. They thanked her not only for the performance but also for the reminder that life and talent are measured not by appearances or recognition, but by dedication, passion, and the quiet pursuit of excellence. She listened to each person with patience, responding with kindness and warmth. There was no sense of superiority or pride, only the quiet confidence of someone who had lived fully and shared her gifts without expectation. Her humility became as much a part of her presence as her music, leaving a lasting impression on everyone she met. A few young people lingered near the piano, inspired by the performance. They asked if she could teach them, hoping to learn not only the technical skill but also the patience, discipline, and emotional depth she displayed. She nodded gently, agreeing to guide them in small ways, reminding them that the most important lessons were not just in the music, but in the values and attitudes that allowed talent to flourish. As the evening wound down, the guests began to leave, still talking in hushed tones about what they had witnessed. They discussed the skill, the emotion, and the life experience that had made the performance so memorable. The elderly nun remained seated quietly, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the excited conversations around her. Yet it was clear that she had left a lasting impression, one that would stay with the audience long after the lights dimmed, and the hall emptied. In the quiet moments after the crowd had gone, the nun reflected on the evening. She had shared her music, touched hearts, and reminded people of the importance of humility, patience, and inner strength. She had shown that talent does not need to announce itself, and that true mastery can reside in unexpected places. The experience had been fulfilling, not because of applause or recognition, but because she had connected with others through her music, her story, and the performance she had given became something that would be remembered by those present for years. The guests left with a new perspective, inspired to be more humble, more open-minded, and more appreciative of the hidden talents around them. They had learned that greatness can come quietly, that people should never be judged by appearances, and that patience, skill, and dedication have a power that commands respect without demanding it. The elderly nun, small in stature but immense in skill and wisdom, had reminded everyone that night that the most powerful lessons often arrive quietly, unexpectedly, and with grace. She had shared her music not for recognition but for connection, and in doing so, she transformed the evening, the audience, and even the young performers who had doubted her. As she packed her things and prepared to leave the hall, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The performance had achieved its purpose. It had not only entertained but had inspired, humbled, and reminded everyone of something fundamental about life. Talent, dedication, and humility are virtues that can change hearts. And the evening had proven this beyond question. The elderly nun walked out of the hall slowly, her cane supporting her steps, her mind calm, and her heart full. Outside, the cool night air greeted her gently. She looked up at the stars for a moment, smiling softly, knowing that the music she carried within her would continue to touch lives in ways she could not always see. Her journey, her dedication, and her talent had made a quiet, unforgettable impact. And that was enough. And in that simple, humble way, the audience and the world she touched were reminded of a powerful truth. Greatness does not need to be loud. Talent does not need to boast. And sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come from the most unexpected people, quietly waiting for the moment to shine.